What a field day for the heat down there. 1,000 people in the street, singing songs and they carry inside. Mostly saying hooray for our side. These battle lines being drawn. Nobody's right if everybody wrong. When people speak in their mind, getting so much resistance from behind. We got to stop the children, what's that sound? Everybody look, it's going down.
Hello, everyone. This is Lauren Steiner. Welcome to tonight's edition of The Robust Opposition. This is the show where we focus on activism and organizing with a specific focus towards fighting neoliberalism, which is taking goods and services that belong in the public sector and privatizing them, which is exactly what's happening in the teachers' strike today. I've got a special guest today, Varshini Prakash, who is the new executive director and co-founder of the Sunrise Movement, and she's going to talk about the Green New Deal. But before I introduce her, I want to tell you a little bit about the Green New Deal. A version of it was first mentioned by Ralph Nader, who I voted for, by the way, when he ran for president in 2000. And then he was talking about a blue-green alliance. The official coalition, the Blue-Green Alliance, was founded in 2006. In 2007, Thomas Friedman first used the term Green New Deal in one of his columns. And then also at the same time, a working group was forming by the Green Party in Europe to plan a Green New Deal. And their report was released in July of 2008. Van Jones also was appointed to Obama's White House, and he was trying to get the concept of a Green New Deal off the ground. And then Jill Stein ran on the Green New Deal. It was the key component of her platform when she ran for president in 2012. The climate mobilization was formed in 2014, and that was an organization that talked about a World War II style mobilization to address climate change. In 2016, both Jill Stein and Bernie Sanders ran and talked about the Green New Deal, and AOC ran on it in 2018. So now we have Varshini Prakash. Welcome to the show.
Hi there. Thanks for having me.
Sure. I want to read your bio before we talk about how you and your group got in the Green New Deal. So Varshini is the co-founder and executive director of Sunrise, a movement of young people working to stop climate change, take back our democracy from big oil, and elect leaders who will fight for our generation's health and well-being. As an undergraduate at the University of Massachusetts, she took on the fossil fuel industry by pushing her university to stop investing in coal, oil, and gas. She led the campaign to victory after a 2-week-long escalation involving thousands of students, alumni, and faculty. Varshini has also been a voice for young Americans as a delegate to international climate negotiations, including last fall when she led a mass walkout at a Trump administration event, which went viral, landing headlines in hundreds of newspapers around the world, including the front page of the New York Times. Varshini's work has been featured on Democracy Now!, Teen Vogue, and BBC. She was recently named to the Grist Top 50 Fixers for people cooking up the boldest, most ambitious solutions to humanity's biggest challenges. Varshini currently lives in Massachusetts. Again, welcome to the show. I'm so pleased to have you on.
Thanks, Lauren. It's great to be here.
Okay. So my first question for you that I ask all the activists that I interviewed is, tell us how you got into activism. What were your influences growing up that made you into a fighter for environmental change?
Well, I would have to say that everything starts with my family and where my family is from. Was born and raised in Massachusetts, but I'm the child of 2 South Indian immigrants from Chennai, India, and Bangalore, India. And growing up, I just constantly was seeing the impact of the ravages of climate change, environmental pollution, corporate mistreatment of individuals, and the growing water crisis that was impacting millions of people in the country. And there was one moment in particular when in December of 2015, there was a really horrible climate-fueled flood that hit and struck southern India, largely in Chennai and other parts where my family lived. And I can just so vividly remember the image of mothers and children walking chest deep in storm waters for miles, of like fisher people who came out to rescue people because the government refused to come out fast enough, of just like returning to India a year later and still smelling the stench of garbage and sewage that remained from that disaster. And I think something like thousands of people were displaced and hundreds of people were killed. And I remember just thinking it was sheer luck that my grandparents had been at their apartment at the time, or they might have been stuck without food or water or electricity for days. Obviously, other people were not so lucky. So I've just had a lot of experiences like that, of seeing the way that blood has been shed over environmental disaster and climate disaster, and the increasing and terrifying wars over basic resources, and feeling like it's up to our generation to do something to stop it, that no person should have to live in fear of losing the people that they love or the places that they call home to crises that are preventable and that are being created by wealthy individuals half a globe away.
Exactly. So your first campaign was this fossil fuel divestment at your college. And I understand that 32 people got arrested. Were you one of those?
I wasn't one of those, but largely because I was organizing the whole thing. So I wasn't able to get arrested then, but it was one of the most moving moments of my life. We started out on a Monday morning. We had been organizing for 3 years as young students to get the University of Massachusetts system to stop investing in coal, oil, and gas, essentially the corporations that were destroying our future and had spent the last 50 years misinforming the public about the science and buying out politicians on both sides of the aisle, frankly, to stymie progress and halt progress on climate change and taking action on climate. So we led a actually 2-week-long escalation. It started on a Monday morning with 20 young people, and by the middle of the week had over 300 people participating, had 30, I think it was 30, might have been 34 arrests by the end of it, of young people who refused to leave our university's administration building protesting their investment policies. So it's just this incredible moment of seeing 18, 19, 20-year-olds really standing up and refusing to allow our institutions, or really asking our institutions to act in accordance with what their purported morals and values claim to be.
Well, I don't want to spend too much time talking about that, but I am curious as to what you learned about organizing from that. What was some of your takeaways that you brought into the Sunrise Movement?
Yeah, well, so in 2016, that campaign actually won after that 2-year-long escalation. So one of the biggest things that said to me is that people power works, that large numbers of people advocating for change really, really is impactful, and that young people who have always been the vanguards of change throughout our history in every major social movement, civil rights, LGBTQ movements, women's suffrage, so many others, Occupy, Black Lives Matter, that young people were well poised in this moment to really push the issue of climate change, force it into the public debate and the national conversation, and make politicians really confront the crisis that we feel in our lives about the predicament that we're putting our futures in every single day, the longer we deter taking action. So that was something we brought. That's why Sunrise is a movement largely led by young people, teens, 20-somethings, who are in this broader fight to stop the climate crisis and create millions of good jobs for our generation.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that protest and doing protest strategically is a really useful and important way, and has been used throughout history to really push this conversation and highlight the stories of private suffering and bring it into the public spotlight.
So next, move on to how you became a delegate to COP23 and what was the action that you participated in there.
Yeah, I guess it wasn't last fall. It was 2 falls ago. I can't believe it's already 2019. Yeah, so I applied for the Sustainus delegation to COP23. I was accepted. It was a group, I don't remember how many of us it was, somewhere around 15 or 16 of us, who traveled to Bonn, Germany during COP23. It was the first year that we were at COP after Donald Trump had threatened to pull the United States out of the Paris Agreement and after he had become president. So there was a lot that had changed on the international scale because of that, and a lot of uncertainty about what the direction forward would be. So when we got there, we saw that the Trump administration's only sanctioned panel at the COP, which is just the UN climate meeting, was a panel talking about the role of fossil fuels in fighting climate change, which is absurd. So we were like, this cannot continue. We need to do something really big here. We organized everybody that we could, talked to all the partners we could, talk to all the environmental justice community that was there, the incredible indigenous leaders that were there who have been leading this fight for a long time, talk to others, citizen action groups and political wonks and all the people who were there, and actually led a many person disruption of the panel where we all got up and sang sort of a remix of Proud to Be an American, and disrupted it for about 10 minutes and took everybody that was in that room out, and they were largely left talking to themselves. It was like them and the media.
The chart.
But we see right through your greed. It's spilling all across the world for that coal money, and we proudly stand up until you keep it in the ground. Let the people of the world unite, and we are here to stay. We claim to be an American, but we see right through your greed. It's killing all across the world for that coal money, and we proudly stand up until you keep it in the ground. The people of the world unite, and we are here to stay.
It was incredible. It was terrifying. I was one of the first people that had to start the singing disruption, and I can't tell you how hard my heart was beating.
No, I know. I did a disruption of it was called an aquifer exemption workshop. Found out that the fracking companies had injected toxic fracking wastewater into aquifers, drinking water aquifers, 2,500 times. And not only was Dogger not stopping them, they were conducting these workshops that they were calling aquifer exemption workshops. They were teaching them how to get around doing an environmental impact report. So we planned to go into one of these workshops and let it go on for a little bit while. And I was the first one to stand up, and I was all dressed in like a nice dress and everything like that. And I said, wait a minute, shouldn't you be stopping this rather than teaching people how to do it? And then they were like, oh, yes, well, we're going to have questions and answers at the end of the program, and just let us finish on with our program. And then 2 minutes later, one of my colleagues from Communities for Better Environment stood up with a bottle of dirty water and walked to the front and said, will you drink this water? And it just went on from there. We unfurled a banner. We started chanting. They called the CHP. It took them like 10 minutes to come. So I know what you're talking about, your heart beating when you're about to do. So moving on, how did you decide to found the Sunrise Movement? Who was your co-founder, and what was your initial concept for the group?
It was a bunch of us who were working in the youth climate movement, and about a dozen of us came together in, I would say, early 2016. And we were all working on different projects. Some of us were leading these youth delegations to the UN climate conferences. Others of us were working to start some of the first fossil fuel divestment campaigns on college campuses. Other folks were fighting pipelines and fossil fuel infrastructure, or, pushing states to go 100% renewable. So we were doing all kinds of things in every sector and every part of the youth climate sphere. And we'd achieved some successes. And at the same time, we're all feeling extremely nervous and frustrated and uneasy that while it seemed like the hurricanes were getting bigger, the fires were getting bigger, the floods were getting stronger, our movements were not growing with them. And so we brought a dozen or so of our top leaders together to spend a year really deeply thinking about what it would mean to build a youth climate movement that could go to scale, that could engage and bring in thousands, tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of young people and sustain that kind of energy. And that could actually change politics in America. And so we launched after spending about a year and a half studying the successes and failures of the climate movement, of really studying the shoulders that we walked upon, that we stood upon. People who had led Indian revolution movements, Serbian revolution movements, the civil rights movement, and other movements, contemporary movements as well, like global justice movement, etc. And so we launched in July of 2017, really with a mission, as you alluded to at the beginning, of organizing a movement led by young people that could actually bring together both people power through protest, demonstration, grassroots organizing, with electoral organizing, bringing the people and the political together in one strategy that was going to last us through the next presidential cycle, through 2021. And so largely over the last year, we've worked on getting fossil fuel money out of our political system, because the heinous amounts of oil money that has completely corrupted our democracy. We spent a lot of time working to elect candidates that will deliver us pro-climate action majorities, and kick out fossil fuel funded candidates. And now we're spending a lot of time, we're still doing a lot of those things, and we're also building the political and public consensus around the real solutions to the climate crisis that are in line with what the latest science demands.
How you connected with AOC, Alexandria Ocasio Cortez, who's also given the progressive movement a huge shot in the arm with her passion and her vigor, and she just doesn't take anything from anybody. And so we have great admiration for her. How did you hook up with her? And was she planning on doing this, a select committee on climate change? Or was that an idea that you put into her head? Or how did that whole thing work out?
Yeah. Well, we'd known about Alexandria for a long time. We actually, during her primary, sent out a bunch of sunrisers in New York to canvass for her and support her in her election. So it was, we were elated that she won. And she supported a Green New Deal. She ran, as you said previously, she ran on a Green New Deal. She swore off fossil fuel money within, I think, weeks of launching her campaign. I mean, she doesn't take any corporate money at all. And so we'd known of her and worked with her for a while prior to the action that we did a week after the election. But we really planned the election on our, the action after the election on our own. We wanted to push climate change to the forefront of the Democratic agenda in the 116th Congress, because we'd seen from recent UN climate reports that time was rapidly running out. We had like 12 years to transform every aspect of our economy and society if we wanted to avert a pretty horrifying climate catastrophe. So we were planning this action. We got in touch with our team, just, asking for a tweet, I think, is what our initial thing was. We're like, hey, can you just support us and say something positive about it? And her team decided that she was actually going to come by and lend some support. And she came through the action and said some really inspiring words and sort of symbolically sat in with us, which is unheard of to do in the soon-to-be Speaker Pelosi's office, one of the most powerful politicians in the country. And the select committee at that, what Alexandria Ocasio Cortez actually put out was the Select Committee for a Green New Deal. And this was largely in response to a select committee that Nancy Pelosi was talking about reviving, that is about 10 years old, that really had no teeth, was largely used for raising awareness about the issue of climate, elevating it as an issue, and studying the impacts more closely. And 2019, frankly, is not a time for studying or raising more awareness about the issue. It's a time that we need action to stop it. So she launched this Select Committee for a Green New Deal as a response, and it called for Congress to create a select committee that essentially would be mandated to draft a plan for what a Green New Deal might look like. And when we say a Green New Deal, what we mean is essentially it's like an umbrella term for a set of policies and programs that over time would stop the climate crisis and get us off fossil fuels fast, create tens of millions of good, high-paying jobs for Americans, work in the process to virtually eliminate poverty. There's a ton included in it, but the basic premise of it is that no person in this country should, all people in this country should be able to drink fresh water, breathe clean air, have a safe home, and live lives that are in peace and in dignity. So that was sort of the beginning of that whole campaign, and we had no idea that it was going to take off in the way that it did. I mean, it absolutely exploded on November 13th. Headlines that had been reading like Dems damp down hope on climate a couple days before the election, we're now reading climate change tops Democratic agenda for 116th Congress. There were like 6,000 articles that were written about a Green New Deal and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Sunrise. We had 45 members of Congress that signed on to support the Select Committee for a Green New Deal. I think 300 local officials of their own volition started a petition to show that they also endorsed and backed a Green New Deal. And there's like, I could go on and on and on. That doesn't even touch on the amount of youth energy and activism. We went back time and again, got like hundreds of office visits to Congress people across the nation. A month after this action, we brought back 1,000 more people. So that was 4 times as many as, or 5 times as many as we had in the first time, to lobby every single congressperson that we could, and actually held 3 more simultaneous sit-ins. So this fall has been a wild, wild ride. And I think it goes to show that a bunch of kids with a pretty ambitious plan can change everything in an instant, because the conversation we're having in this country is no longer about, is climate change happening? It's like, that debate is over. Now we're talking about the actual solutions to the crisis.
Yeah. Well, I want to say that I was at one of the events at my congressman's office, Ted. I live streamed through the help of some of my remote correspondents the action at Jimmy Gomez's office, and I wrote a song for the action at Adam Schiff's office.
That's awesome.
During the holidays, so I took the lyrics of Jingle Bells and changed them to reflect the Green New Deal.
Go for it.
The world is getting hot. We only have 12 years.
Unless we act right now, the end is surely near. We have to mobilize a committee we do need. We want you to sign on right now. We shouldn't have to plead. Oh, Green New Deal, Green New Deal, join the fight today. Save the earth, sign on right now, or there'll be hell to pay. If you have to stop with Russiagate so lame, Exxon and the cooks are who we have to blame. Melting permafrost, fires, floods, and droughts. You have to focus on real shit or else we'll vote you out. Oh, Green New Deal, join the fight today. Save the earth, sign on right now or there'll be hell to pay.
how about you give us an overview? I read the document, and I see I've read that it's a changing document, that it kind of keeps growing. What the main components of the Green New Deal? You alluded to them, but you sort of brushed over them.
Yeah, there's a lot in there. It is a very expansive, ambitious document, no doubt. And we think it's, one of the few documents that even comes close, that's in the national debate right now, that even comes close to getting at the real ambition of the crisis. Getting at the real ambition of where we need to be if we want to tackle the crisis. So a few components that I think are really essential. 100% renewable by 2030. So this means the elimination of all warming emissions by 2030. That includes carbon, but it also includes other greenhouse gases, and it includes the energy sector, coal, oil, gas, all the combustible stuff, but it also includes, transportation and agricultural sectors as well. Then other parts of this are, for example, a federal jobs guarantee. So actually supporting any individual who wants or needs a job to do the critical work of averting climate catastrophe in this country. There is so much work that needs to be done. There are millions upon millions of creative, incredible, smart, hardworking people who could be put to work. We could create millions upon millions of good jobs, but we need to fight really hard to ensure that those are high-paying jobs, that they actually employ people who have been historically left out of the prosperity that's been brought by the renewable sector, communities of color, low-income communities, etc.
I've been fighting fracking since 2012, and the city of Carson, which is a low-income community of color, wanted to ban fracking. And Maria Elena de Raza, who just got elected to the state Senate, basically one of her platform planks was she's opposed to fracking, actually bussed in 500 workers from the IBEW and the Teamsters. They were all wearing shirts that said "Jobs for Carson," even though there were going to be only 32 permanent jobs. None of them would be for Carson people because they'd bring in people from North Dakota or Texas, and they weren't even unionized jobs. Sat there right next to the lawyer from Occidental Petroleum, thick as thieves, killing this fracking ban, along with our governor, Jerry Brown, who's taken $9.8 million from companies. But I was talking to some IBEW guys outside the thing, and I said, I don't understand. Why aren't you doing photovoltaics? And they say, we're being trained in photovoltaics, but we've got to protect jobs wherever they exist. And then I subsequently found out that you can make $120,000 a year working in a refinery. You cannot make that kind of money as a solar installer. These are kind of big base jobs. We talked about this with Jill Stein the other night. They're not, they don't pay health care. And it's just going to be really hard. It's like bringing manufacturing back to this country. I mean, globalism, once you've let the genie out of the bottle and people are used to paying, it's like Robert Greenwald did a film for, his company, Brave New Films. It was about Walmart, and it was called The High Cost of Low Price. And we're all accustomed to low price things. If we pay people more, prices are going to go up. What conversations have you had about how we're going to make these well-paying jobs?
Yeah. No, I think you're completely right. And I think it is something we're going to have to grapple with constantly. It's something that I don't think the environmental movement or the climate movement has always paid attention to. And I think that that's created some rub. And we know that, essentially since the beginning of labor, the, environmental side of the environmental movement and the labor movement have oftentimes been at odds deeply. And so I think it's one of the most important questions out there. I think we've got to be clear about what we believe in, and we can't leave people behind. And I'm not saying that we're going to get every single thing that we ask for, but we cannot drop people and leave people behind in the midst of negotiations or bargaining or whatever it is. I think we've got to push for the biggest thing we can out there. And that means, I think you're completely right. People in these sectors have been paid tons and tons of money. And people who are coming into renewable energy jobs are getting paid, many of them are getting paid low wages. They have no unionization. In fact, like, you know, some of these people are literally engaging in active union busting. They have no benefits. They don't have, oftentimes have healthcare, or they have to work weird part-time hours where, you know, like they're paid just enough so that they don't have to receive benefits or healthcare or anything like that. And it's a really big issue. And so I think we've got to make sure that, I don't have like the perfect answer for you. All I know is that it has to be one of the core pillars, like economic justice has to remain one of the core pillars of what we're asking for in a Green New Deal, and we can't compromise on that. In the same way that we can't compromise on there being massive investment in low-income communities and communities of color that are already experiencing the impacts of a warming world, right?
This was the situation in Carson. This was primarily a low-income community of color that was already inundated with multiple fossil fuel projects. Occidental wanted to drill 200 new wells.
The other component of it is actually fully centering racial and economic justice and a just transition and everything that we do around a transition to an 100% renewable energy economy. So I said some of this previously, but that looks like massive investment in communities on the front lines of poverty and of pollution and of climate disaster. And that looks like actually supporting communities that are already experiencing the impacts of a warming world to weather that storm literally and figuratively, and be able to protect themselves and prepare for storms and floods and droughts and heat waves and all of the things that are getting worse and worse on a daily basis and a yearly basis. And it's going to look like actually ensuring that people, that workers who work in this fossil fuel sector actually have a just transition. We've seen that the investments it takes to actually support folks to find other jobs at equally high rates of payment are minuscule compared to our GDP or compared to our annual budget, and that it's fully possible to support workers in the fossil fuel sector to transition in a just and equitable way. So all of those need to be a central component of the Green New Deal. There's a lot more in there, like actually doing weatherization, increasing energy efficiency. So the amount of money you spend right now to really revamp our energy efficiency will pay dividends in years to come because of savings, or, you know, some of the stuff that you were talking about at the beginning of the show, Lauren. And so about your own costs too from your energy systems right now.
Let me ask you a couple of questions about things that I noticed that were in there, that weren't in there, something that was worrisome to me. You probably have not heard this before, but I did a show on this last year, and you talk about the smart grid. And the smart grid relies on smart meters, and smart meters involves wireless. So the meter man doesn't have to come and read your meter. It's transmitted wirelessly over Wi-Fi. And this also has to do with the big planned rollout of 5G. People with electromagnetic sensitivity are not the only ones who are going to suffer from this. There's been a lot of studies about Wi-Fi that they actually suppress in this country, but are published in Israel. And it talks about the effect of Wi-Fi on human health. Mm-hmm. So I think you have to research this a little more carefully, tread a little bit more lightly before you just kind of embrace that technology. The other thing that I noticed that was missing, my favorite part, I think, of Jill Stein's Green New Deal is the 50% cut to the military budget. Because obviously the military is what is spending most of the money. It's like 50% of our discretionary budget. And I'm not going to ask you how the Green New Deal is going to be paid for. That's a mainstream corporate media question, because we know if they can afford the military, if they can afford bank bailouts, if they can afford tax cuts, they can afford a Green New Deal. And even if we did have to balance the budget. For those of us that believe in modern monetary theory, where you just, if you have fiat currency, you can just, the creation of something is just a click in a computer screen. So it's actually better. And Stephanie Kelton, who I'm sure you're familiar with her work, says that the more deficit spending you do, the more stimulatory it is for the economy. And in fact, Obama's stimulus program was not enough to get us out of that last recession. But cutting the military is just good for world peace, obviously. And the military is the largest user of fossil fuels, I think, of all the institutional users. So I'm wondering your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's completely true that a bloated military budget is something that we're absolutely seeing right now. We saw hikes to that by $100 billion even in the last year, which I think is absurd. Right now, we have failing schools. We have families who are unable to afford college education. We have families who are unable to afford healthcare or don't have access to it. And so to increase the military budget while threatening to take away people's healthcare is an absurd, like absolutely absurd allocation of priorities. And I think is one of the biggest reasons why people like Alexandria Ocasio Cortez and Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar and Ayanna Pressley are gaining so much national prominence. Is because they're actually calling a spade and calling out the people who have supported and buttressed a system that has created such gross wealth inequality and income inequality in this country and the globe, honestly.
It's not written in the document.
No, and it's not specifically what we see the Green New Deal as, rather than like small cuts to different things and small spending projects from other parts of the budget, is actually like a massive investment program that is going to be like trillions of dollars over a given amount of time, but that is actually also going to stimulate the economy in huge ways, and as I said earlier, pay dividends down the road through a variety of improvements to our country's energy efficiency, increasing the number of people who have high-paying jobs, which increases the tax base, all of that. And so a lot of why we're talking about that is really because we see this as a mass investment program and think that even cuts to a bloated military budget don't even come close to doing what we actually need to do to stop the climate crisis. Do I think that our country's current prioritization is absolutely wrong and miscalculated? Yes, absolutely. And I think that people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez do as well and are going to continue to push for us to prioritize our budget in different places.
Okay, that leads me to the next thing that is left out of there, and that is animal agriculture. I am not vegan or vegetarian. I probably won't be, but I do listen to all my friends who talk about how much fossil fuels animal agriculture uses and creates. What are your thoughts about that? Are you not touching that one either?
Well, we are talking about the amount of fossil fuels that agriculture uses. It is actually, when we say 100% renewable and when we talk about 100% elimination of all warming emissions, the reason why we don't just talk about decarbonization is because we're talking about methane and other greenhouse gases that get created from not only energy, but also in agriculture and in transportation. So that is actually in there, though it may not be there as specifically as some folks might want it, but that's actually what the rest of this year is going to be about, is starting to take the, you could call it like a blueprint that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez put out at the beginning of last year and really fleshing it out and giving people a better sense of the details. So yes, definitely consider that to be an issue. And definitely is a part of the broader conversation.
Okay, next point is nuclear. Now, I don't see nuclear written in there. And I started my environmental activism when I was your age in college, fighting the Seabrook nuclear power plant. And it was the same year that we had the near meltdown at 3 Mile Island, which I'm going to be doing my show on. The 40th anniversary of 3 Mile Island corresponds with my 40th, reunion from college. But anyway, Obama started the first nuclear power plants in our country in 30 years with his all of the above energy strategy and his Secretary of Energy, Ernest Moniz. While the document didn't contain nuclear, I was reading a lengthy article in Vox, which I'm sure you've read, and one of the policy wonks on the Green New Deal, his name escapes me, talked about how we're going to need nuclear. And even James Hansen is saying we need nuclear. But I think that's very bad. I think, nuclear, they don't think about all the carbon that goes into the nuclear process. It's not to mention how cost ineffective it is. So I'm wondering if you have a feeling about whether nuclear should be included in the Green New Deal.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think in any way we're talking about bringing like dozens of new nuclear power plants online at all. I don't think that is what we're discussing in the Green New Deal. I'm not sure exactly. I would need to know. I would need to talk to the AOC team a little bit more to know their exact position on it. But it's not our understanding that that will play a huge role in the Green New Deal in this moment.
I noticed that it does not have a carbon tax, which Jill Steins did, and that's very smart. I covered the protest of Jerry Brown's climate summit recently in San Francisco, and one of the big things that we were protesting was, the cap and trade and the carbon tax. What it allows you to do is continue to pollute at those refineries I mentioned in Richmond and Torrance here in California, as long as you buy some land in
Right.
and then you kick the indigenous people out who are living sustainably on that land, forcing them into the real economy where they're getting paid minimum wage. And a lot of ill social effects come as a result of that. So I'm glad that the carbon tax isn't in there. I'm sure you've read Naomi Klein's book. She talks about—
This changes everything?
Yes, she
Yeah.
talks about capitalism. And so I'm wondering, do we not have to address consumerism and capitalism? Because after all, capitalism is based on growing the GDP, which means producing, shipping, selling, marketing more useless products that we really don't need. So I don't see anything really. I mean, we know that Alex is a Democratic socialist, but is it just too scary to bring this up in a document that you're trying to get passed by a Democratic Congress and Lord knows a Republican Senate?
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure what the choices were around for the select committee in particular. I think it definitely could be something that we look at for the next year. I think it's pretty clear that, unfettered growth with finite resources is untenable, and I think that's something that we can definitely talk about further. So that's a great note of saying, and I'm sure that will be a robust discussion on that front for sure, considering the people's backgrounds who are going to continue to bring this forward in 2019.
Yeah. So my next question for you is, the climate committee, the one that they finally did appoint, the climate committee. You guys were really disappointed in that. Can you tell us why you're disappointed with that and what you plan to try to do about it?
Yeah. Well, largely it was because Pelosi and Democratic leadership failed to give us any of the concessions we wanted around our demands. So it lacks any subpoena power. It doesn't include a mandate to actually draft a plan around a Green New Deal, and it allows people taking fossil fuel money to sit on the committee. So in many ways, especially with the lack of subpoena power, it's actually less effective and more toothless than the Select Committee on Climate Change that Pelosi created about a decade ago. So I kind of think of this as if, your doctor told you that you had stage 3 cancer and then prescribed you multivitamins for it. It's utterly insufficient for what we need in this moment. So that's why we feel frustrated. And we're going to continue to engage in the Select Committee on Climate Change. We're hopefully going to be able to sit down with Kathy Castor, who's the new chairperson of it. And she has definitely made mention that she would be interested in signing the No Fossil Fuel Money pledge. And we need to, hopefully see that she's excited about really pursuing something about a Green New Deal as part of it, but we've sort of lost faith in that particular institutional pathway. So a lot of what we're doing now is continuing to build buy-in from politicians, particularly in the Democratic Congress, but also amongst a lot of senators as well. But we are also bringing the Green New Deal beyond the Beltway and into the American public. There's a poll that came out a few weeks ago that said that 80% of Americans haven't heard about a Green New Deal, but 80% of the people who have support it, and that includes like 64% of Republicans. So this is something that has a ton of public support behind it, and we think that if we can actually spread the message, and we're going to do so through a 15-city tour called The Road to the Green New Deal, that we can actually build and give people the resources to really push their federal policymakers to back the Green New Deal in its greatest, most ambitious form.
Yeah, it's actually sad that it takes all these fires and droughts and tornadoes and weather events to finally connect people. Because it used to be that the climate change was so far in the future. I don't even like that term. I prefer climate chaos or climate catastrophe, because actually it was Frank Luntz, the Republican pollster, who got us off of saying global warming, because that sounded scary, and got us climate change, because change is good, right? I mean, what could you have against change? But anyway, about that fossil fuel pledge, do you think it's equally important where representatives' money is invested as is who that person takes campaign contributions from?
That's an interesting question, and it's not something I've fully entertained, I don't think. We've been largely focused on, on the campaign trail, and when they're in power, who are their best friends and who do they receive the most amount of money from. We've been less looking at what their personal finances are, largely because that's extremely difficult to find out, and people are reticent to give up that kind of information. But I think personal divestment is also, an important conversation, and I think it's worth looking at.
I want to talk about the growth of the Sunrise Movement, just the nitty gritty. How many chapters do you have? How many members and how many states and cities? Just kind of that.
Yeah. So we started with 6 people in July of 2017. And to date, we have over 125 Sunrise hubs. That's what we call our local chapters all across the country. I honestly couldn't tell you every single state that they're in. New ones come on every single day, in every part of the country. We have a very active one where I live in Sunrise, Boston, and it's fantastic. It's an amazing group of people from the ages of, 15 to 40. We have a wide definition of youth. And largely we are focused, we're everywhere, but we also focus really strongly in places that have been ravaged by climate change or fossil fuel extraction or exploitation, and that combined with where the key battlegrounds politically are, both for 2018 and 2020. So places like, for example, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Florida, some of the leadership states on this issue, or would-be leadership states on this issue if they could get their act together, New York, California, and more.
Okay, so my final question is this. I understand that you're getting involved in the Democratic primary, and Jill Stein was actually the one to let me know about that. And so she has a comment for you that she put in written form that I want to read, and I think it has a lot of validity, and I want to know what you think. The Sunrise Movement recently announced it would focus its energy and resources on the Democratic primary. Focusing strictly on the Democratic primary implies the Democratic Party is the only party worthy of consideration by the climate movement. This undercuts the power of the Sunrise Movement's demand by essentially assuring the Democratic Party of its support. This is a setup for ongoing neglect by the Democratic Party as it continues to take support of the climate movement for granted. If the Sunrise Movement forced candidates to compete across party lines for support, it would have real leverage on Democratic candidates and the party. The Republicans, of course, won't offer real competition, but the Greens do, having campaigned for the Green New Deal as the core of our agenda for nearly a decade. Since the climate movement can't compete with the fossil fuel industry's money, it has to compete with power and mustn't shrink from using the full extent of that power through the threat of political choice. So what do you think of that?
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, yeah, I mean, appreciate the work that she and lots of other people have been doing on this issue for a while. The list of folks who have been working on it for decades that you gave at the beginning of this was long and probably still not exhaustive of folks who have written and run on this for a long time. A lot of the reason why we started Sunrise and why we get engaged politically is because of a lot of us were motivated by Bernie Sanders' run in 2016. And it was one of the first times that we saw quite literally millions of young people feeling like somebody was actually talking to them, was in many ways, not always, accountable to the base, and was actually talking about the real issues that working Americans and young people face and feel every single day. And we saw what his run could do to completely shift the way that the Democratic Party operated and the center of gravity, and established a new normal within the Democratic Party. And I think in many ways actually has stirred up a ton of has actually just led to more democracy within the party itself. And I've seen the same thing happen when Alexandria Ocasio Cortez challenged someone like Joe Crowley, the fourth most powerful Democrat in the House, and was able to, topple, was able to unseat him. So we really see an opportunity right now, I would say, and a real path to power and shifting power by taking the Democratic Party, which is the only party that really, aside from the Green Party, that talks about climate change and at least acts like they want to do something about it. And we see a real opportunity to actually shift the entirety of what that party stands for and who it's for and who it represents in the next few years. And we think we can't ignore the amount of power that's on the table there, and the amount of leverage and influence that party has in this country. So we really do see our main focuses being on shifting the Democratic Party to actually be one that is of by and for all people.
Well, good luck with that. I exited in 2017. I ran LA for Bernie. I was a delegate for him. I got involved with the Democratic Party. It was the only time I was ever involved with party politics because of him. I'd been involved in Occupy, and to me, if Occupy believed in electoral politics and had a candidate, it would have been Bernie Sanders. But the way the DNC cheated him and the way I see the same old people in the media, the corporate media, allied with the Democratic Party smearing him right now, as he may or may not announce for 2020, it does not give me a lot of hope. And I see a lot of neoliberal candidates like Kamala Harris and Cory Booker and Kristen Gillibrand, all positioning themselves, taking on his platform to run in 2020. So I guess I want to ask you, are you going to pick a candidate in the primary who pledges to endorse this entire Green New Deal? Is that going to be a litmus test for who you endorse in the
Absolutely.
primary?
Yeah, it will be. It is going to be, there are going to be a lot of people who are running for president, and we don't plan on endorsing anytime soon, largely because we want to see how it all shakes out and who has the most ambitious and climate platform that's actually in line with what we're talking about. But we do plan on what we're asking for is laid out in the Green New Deal resolution, and we will put it out in various formulations over this next year. And we will back the kind of candidate that we think is actually serious about the level of ambition that we're talking about and isn't just saying it as a slogan or a catchphrase to be a part of a growing movement for change.
Now, do you plan to use any other tactics like the tar sands blockade or the valve turners where you actually chain yourself to a fracking rig or stop the construction of a pipeline? Or is it all going to be through the electoral and legislative process?
We will not be engaging in those tactics, but we do civil disobedience and we do electoral. So part of what we see as our value add to the movement is being able to combine both of those things and use protest and demonstration to get the urgency of the issue to the forefront of our politicians and public's consciousness, and then doing the electoral and legislative organizing that we need to do that's actually going to translate that energy and that momentum into tangible victories that will last the test of time.
Great. Well, I want to let you know of an effort that's happening that Sunrise Movement in Los Angeles is participating in that I'm involved in, and that's the effort to try to stop our municipally owned power company from investing billions of dollars in aging fossil fuel plants.
Wow.
There's a video which I made in which we show how we protested outside the DWP hearing last week, and then we made public comment inside the hearing. And there's going to be another DWP hearing that we want people to come out for on January 22nd. I will post the Facebook event page in the comments. And I want to thank my guest so very much for spending this time with me and spending extra time than I had told her. And I wish you guys all the luck, because God knows we need it.
Thank you, Lauren. It's been a pleasure to be on here. And thanks everybody for watching.
So I just want to end the show by promoting my next show, which is going to be with Mike Figueredo from the Humanist Report. Some of you may watch him on YouTube. He's fantastic. He actually included a video that I made when I went to Brad Sherman's town hall to confront him about the fact that he had not signed on to HR 676, which was John Conyers' Medicare for All bill. Gave me the song and dance about how he had to save Obamacare, and I told him he could do two things at the same time. Anyway, Mike made a video and called Brad Sherman's office live while he was making the video, and shortly thereafter, Brad Sherman signed on to Medicare. So these kind of tactics work, folks, and I'm really happy that we're all working together on the same page for Bernie Sanders' agenda. I'm going to ask you, if this is the first time you're seeing my show, to follow me here on Facebook, to subscribe to my YouTube channel, Lauren from LA, to follow me on Twitter, Lauren _ Steiner, and to please share this show. I don't have a Patreon account. I'm not trying to make money for this. I do this as a labor of love. And all I ask is that people share the show, because Facebook keeps putting me in Facebook jail, and I can't share my own show as much as I want. 250 Bernie groups nationwide, and as soon as I share in about 20 or 25 of them, boom, they put me in Facebook jail for another week. Keep sharing this show and keep fighting.